Hi everyone, welcome to channel Qtomation. In previous sessions, we have started creation of REST assured API automation framework. So far what we have done, let's recap quickly. This was our framework structure. We have created pom.xml file in our project. If you see, this is our project structure which we have created. In first session, we have created pom.xml file. Pom.xml file includes all the dependencies which we want to import in our project. So all this dependency automatically got downloaded in our project. After pom.xml, we have also created property file. We have created config reader class, which is used to read the data from property file. In our framework, we are going to first create UserCRUD service class. That UserCRUD service class will contain different type of create, update, delete and read user methods. So those service method will be perform all the basic operation, business operation for calling the APIs. So those methods will be written in this user CRUD service class. Whatever data we require that we can put in our property file. So in previous session we have already placed base URI, token etc. in our property file. And to read the data from property file, we have also created config reader class file that we have seen in our previous sessions. So if you haven't watched those sessions yet, I would recommend you to watch the series from the start. Then you will get understanding of each and every step which we are performing. So in today's session, we will focus on creating service class. Service class means user CRUD service class. And we will create, update, delete and read operation methods in this user CRUD service class. If you see the test cases which we are going to automate, that is for these APIs. That is create user, which is a post type of request, get user by ID, update user and delete user. So these are the four main type of request which we are going to automate. Post, get, put and delete. So we will create user service class which will perform these four type of operations. And what is the information that is required to perform that operation? So we will require base URL. We will also require this token which we pass into the headers. If the request type is post or put, we also require this request payload and the base URI along with path parameter and if any specific value which we want to pass. So all these details will be provided in user CRUD service class and that will perform all those operations. For request payload, we will also create payload POJO class. What is POJO? That we have already discussed in our REST tutorial series. So if you want to understand more about POJOs, you can watch the videos in our REST topic series. So POJO means basically it's one of the way of sending request payload while calling the API. So I will show you practically also how we can create the POJO class. So now let's focus and first understand what is the benefit of creating a service class. So whenever we are creating a framework, we should plan everything. We should not randomly write all the test cases because there can be a multiple type of logic which can be repetitive in nature. So main benefit of service class is centralization of API logic. If you are going to work on any project related to API, there is always going to be a CRUD operations. CRUD operations means create, read, update and delete type of APIs. So these are the most common type of APIs which will be involved in each and every project you are going to work upon. So we can write all this CRUD operation inside the service class. And API call methods for a specific endpoint or entity are grouped in one place. So main benefit is all the CRUD operations and API call methods with a specific endpoint or entity are grouped in one place. That is a service class. And because of this centralization, it makes your code easier to manage and reduces duplication across test script. For example, if you write this CRUD operation in one single class, we can reuse those methods in multiple APIs whenever we are calling those. We don't have to write the duplicate things again and again along with these operations. It also improves readability and structure. So we can separate. So if you see, if you write user CRUD service class separately, then you can write test cases class as a separate class. And in these test cases, we can simply create object of this user CRUD service class and we can call the methods of this user CRUD service class. We don't have to write all the logic of calling the API inside the test cases. That is again one of the benefit where if you write all the CRUD services in different class, you can simply focus on assertions, validations inside the test cases and not the entire API calling which we write in user CRUD service class separately. So that makes test cases very crisp and clear. So that test script can only focus on assertions and logic. While request details such as endpoint, headers, payloads are handled in test service class. And this clear separation makes both test and service code easier to read and maintain. So that if someone new person joins, he will be easily able to understand what is the CRUD structure present in user service class so that he can just understand and he can contribute to new test cases as well. That makes it readable and structurally well managed. That is the benefit of using service class. Another benefit is easy maintenance and scalability. Once you write the user service class, if there are any changes to endpoints, headers, or authentication, we don't have to make changes in all the test cases. You just have to focus on user CRUD service class. If you have written the service class, you just have to make changes in those class only. You don't have to make change in each and every test case. So that makes it updation and maintenance very easy. Because whenever we are working in real time project, whenever API automation grows, it adds new operations or sometimes endpoints can also change. We have to sometimes add new methods to the service class. But that is the benefit that we just have to make changes in the service class and not rewriting each and every test case. So it's easier to scale the framework if you are using a separate service class. It also makes reusable and modular. Service methods like create user, this is in context with our project. For example, if you write create user, get user, update user, delete user methods, we can reuse those in multiple test cases and multiple test suites. This reduces code repetition and enables modular efficient test design. So we will practically see how to create a service class which will perform all this create, read, update and delete operation. Along with this service class, what we will do? Inside the service class, we will create these methods, and those methods will get all the details. For example, if you are writing a create method, it will require request payload, token, headers, base URL, path parameter. All these details we will fetch from different places. For example, we can fetch base URL and token from property file. We can pass payload, request payload we will be passing via POJO class. So that also we will create. So if you see this API, that is for create user, it is a post type of request. In this post type of request, to perform this create operation, what are the different things we require? Base URL, path parameter, request payload, headers, and token present inside the header. And then we can simply call this API to fetch the response. So this request payload, there are multiple ways of passing request payload in REST. We have already seen different type of ways to pass the payload in request. So POJO is one of the way by which we can pass this JSON request payload in API call. So we have to create one POJO class. So what is the benefit of POJO class? POJO means plain old Java object class. It is used for passing payload in API automation. It represents the data structure for the request or response body in Java. It is used to easily serialize. Serialization means converting Java object to JSON, and deserialize, that means converting JSON to Java object when we are sending or receiving the API payloads. What is a POJO class for payload? POJO class means it is a simple Java class with private fields that map to JSON keys in the API payload. So according to our request, we have to create one POJO class. I will just show you. Include public getters and setters for each field, and it can also include constructor for convenience, and it is commonly used with libraries like Jackson or JSON for automatic JSON mapping in REST Assured. We have already created a detailed video about POJO in our REST automation series, so you can just watch that video for more information. And how POJO class helps in API testing? We can create user object in our test code and pass that in payload in API request. REST assures will serialize the object to JSON automatically. If you see, when we are calling it via Postman, it is in JSON format. So whenever actual API call is made, it has to be in JSON format. So REST assured will serialize the object to JSON automatically. So we will write a POJO class, then we will create a POJO object, and we will pass that POJO object to API call, and REST will automatically serialize it to JSON. And similarly for responses. So when responses are received, JSON can be deserialized by into a POJO object for easy validation. So we will see that in our coming sessions as well. So just understand, we have to create a POJO class for this request payload, and we will create one service class. And in service class, we will write all those different CRUD methods. So let me start by creating POJO class first. So let's create one POJO class. So let's go to Eclipse. Let me take you to Eclipse. So in Eclipse, if you see, this is our project structure which we have already defined in our previous session, which includes different type of packages. So far we have written config.reader.java file, which is used to read the data from property files, which we have created in main resources. This property file contains base URI and token. So we will pass actual token here. When we will write the actual test case, I will show you by passing actual token here. So that token will be passed in API class. So I will just show you now by creating user service class, that is the user CRUD service file that we have created in our previous session. And we have validated that inside this user CRUD service class, we are able to bring base URI and token from property files by using config reader class. And we have also printed this. So that means by using this config reader.get property, we are able to fetch base URI and token. So I'm just keeping this aside for a second, for some time, because we are going to create one POJO class, because we have to create first POJO class for this payload. This is similar. So if you see for post, that is create user API. In the create user API, this is the request payload, and the structure is same for update user as well. Name, email, gender, status, name, email, gender, status. So request body is similar. So let's create a POJO class. We have already created a package, that is com.api.pojo. So inside this package, we are going to create a new class. Let me create a new class. Let me name it as user POJO. I'm just naming it as user POJO class. Let's create this class. How to create a POJO class? So we have to first understand the request payload. What are different things which are present in the request payload? Name, email, gender and status, which is type of string only. So let's create private string type of variable. Let's give it name, private. Let me simply copy this. Name, email, gender and status. So these are the things which are present in request payload. Now for these variables, we have to create getters and setters methods. So we can automatically create those. So right click, let's go to source, generate getters and setters method. Select email, gender, name, status and generate all the getter and setter methods. Let me just copy and paste it above. So we have created getters and setters methods. Along with that, we can also create constructor. So whenever we are going to create the object of this class, we can pass these parameter values. For example, name value, email value, gender value and status value, that we can pass while creating object of this class. So that's why we have to first create one constructor as well. Public, let's say user POJO. Inside this we have to pass all the parameters: string name, string type email, string gender and string status. So all these values we are going to pass via object creation, when we will create the object in test class. This is the constructor which we have to create for that, and we can pass those by using this keyword, this dot name equal to name, this dot email, this dot gender and this dot status. That's it. So this is our POJO class ready to use. So this POJO class will generate a request payload. So this POJO class object, in this POJO class object, we can pass this request payload. So we can pass this information to this POJO class. So by using this POJO class, we can create the object which will contain all this information. And that object we can pass into create user method, which we are going to create in UserCRUD service.java class. So we have created UserCRUD service.java class in our previous session. But now I will add actual methods like create user, get user, update user, delete user, which will perform those operations by API calling, and it will return the response. So they will get all this information of base URI, token, headers, path parameter, and they will perform the operations of calling get API, update API, delete API, create API, and they will give you response in return, so that we can create the object of these classes and you can use these methods directly in test classes. So now let's create a user service.java, which we have already created in our previous session, but I will just make some changes in it. So this main method now, which we don't require, because this was added just to understand whether we are able to fetch base URI and token from by using config reader class from the property file or not, that we are able to fetch. So I will just remove this part. I will just remove the main method as well. Let me just remove it. This part I will keep because we need this base URL and token in our service methods which we are going to create. So now let's create a methods which will perform this create, read, update and delete operation, and they will return the response. So first one is create user. So first method is create user. So public create user. In this method what we have to pass? Request payload, because when we are using the post method, this is a post type of method which requires request payload. And from where we can pass this request payload? We have just created a POJO class, right? So we just have to pass the POJO class object. So I will just write user POJO user. So this is a user, is basically object of user POJO class that will contain all the information. So let me complete this method. And what is the return type of this method? So once you perform this operation, so this method will perform API calling operation. After calling the API, it will get the response and it will return the response type of object. So return type should be response. So it will return the response type of object. So before that, let's import some static packages. So let me import static packages of rest assured. So we have already seen that. So I will just use import static io dot rest assured dot rest assured dot star, and another is, that's it. So it will import all the rest assured related packages. Now the next thing, let's import this user POJO class. Let's import the response. It will automatically import otherwise, but let's create a method first. So what is the basic syntax? Again, given inside the given we have to pass base URI. So this is a base URI. We have to use dot base URI. Let me just quickly check it out. So we have to also import one of the static package we have already seen in our previous sessions as well. Import static io dot rest assured dot matcher dot given. Inside this base URI we will pass base URI which we are fetching it from property files. So let me just add it here. After that we have to use dot header Okay, so if you see, while writing, we have written these static packages in our UserCRUD service.java class. But if you see, we are not able to import those. Why it is not able to import those? So first you have to go to pom.xml. Inside this pom.xml, if you see the dependencies which we have added for io.restAssured. But inside this, if you see, there is scope. In scope, it is mentioned that it is for test. So it will be applied only when we create the test class. That's why it is not able to import io.restAssured package related classes in our UserCRUD service.java class. That's why it is not giving you option. It is highlighting in red. So what we have to do is just remove this scope from pom.xml from the io rest assured dependency. Just remove this scope so that now we can access this anywhere, not just limited to test class. So now if you go to usercrush just update your project once. If you have make some changes in pom.xml file, after that let's update. So let's update the project maven update project, force update, click on OK. So it will update the project and if you see that red line is gone. Now we are able to use classes from these static packages which are of rest assured in our UserCRUD service.java class as well. So now let's write the syntax. For response also we can now import the correct package. So we are able to successfully import these packages. Now let's focus on our main create user method. Again this dot base URI, this is the dot base URI method. Dot header, in header we have to pass, what are the headers which we are going to pass now? If you see in our request headers we have to pass authorization and token value. So we have already placed authorization token in our property files. If you remember in our last session we have created the property file from which we can bring that token. So first we have to pass the key, that is authorization. This is the key. which we have to pass into the header. And what is the value? Value is token. That token, where is it? Where is it present? This is the token which we are passing it here. And we are fetching this token from config reader.get property token. So if you go to property files, where is the property file? We have placed it in main resources config.properties. Here we have to place the token. So if you see in Postman, authorization is a key and this is a token value. If you see this value, it is a bearer keyword space and actual token value that we have placed in config.property file, bearer and the token which you will get. From where we can get this token, I have already shown you in previous session. So please watch those videos. So here we can place that token so that it will read this value and it will be passed inside the headers. So that is the header token which we are passing. After that, what is the next statement? Given we have passed base URL. Base URI means, again in property files, if you see, this is a base URI. So if you see our request, all the requests have some common URL up to this point. This is a base URI. For get user also, up to this point it is common. So that is basically a base URI up to v2. If you see, up to v2. In real-time project, you might have some different type of modules. For example, users, products, anything it can be a possible. So you have to first understand what is the base URI. So for update user, again up to this v2, I am counting it as a base URI. So if you are going to call this create user API, I am just fetching base URI up to this v2. So let's see. So in base URI, I am just getting that base URI here. Then you are using header and passing authorization token. We also have to pass in header content type. So we have to also pass content type. What is the content type? It is JSON. So for that we have to pass like this, application slash JSON. If you see the Postman request also, we are passing content type as application slash JSON. So that is what we are passing it inside the headers. We have passed base URI. We have passed authorization token in header. We have also passed content type as application JSON. Then what is the next thing we have to pass in the this create user request payload? We have to also pass the request payload. How to pass the request payload? By using dot body. Inside this body, we have created this POJO class. We have to pass this POJO class object, that is user. This is the POJO class object we have to pass as a request payload here. When we write the actual test case, then we will understand how we can pass these values to user POJO class, and it will automatically generate that object which contains all this information, and this object we are passing inside this create user method so that it can call this API and it will fetch the response. So that's why we are passing this user POJO class object inside this body. That is the given section. Now next is when section. When section, inside the when section we can put what type of request we are using, post type of request, because it is a create user, and inside this post we can normally put the URL, but we have already got this base URI. Since we already have this base URI, basically we already have this URL up to this v2. So what is the pending for this create user API? Slash users. So that we can pass it here. Post, here we can simply pass this path parameter slash users and then semicolon. That's it. If you see, just we have to add the return statement. Return this response. So that's the create user method. In given section, we are giving this base URI. Base URI means up to this point. This is the base URI. Then we are passing authorization token inside the header. Token is fetched from config.properties. We are passing header value of content type as application JSON. Then we are passing this request payload as an object of user POJO class. And in this user POJO class, we have defined. So according to our request payload, we have defined all these variables and getters and setters methods along with the constructor. So this you will understand how this actually construct actual values in our coming session when we actually write the test cases. But as of now, just understand the binding of all these things. How we are creating a UserCRUD service class and we are passing all the information which we require while calling the API. So it will call the API. Also we are passing this /users, which is a path parameter here. For create user API, we have to pass /users. So that this entire URL will be complete. Entire URL will be present, request body will be present, and headers are also present. So that it will call this API, it will fetch the response, it will return that response as a type of response type of variable. So that's why we are giving return type as response type of variable. So that when we create the actual test case, we will call this method and we will directly get the response there. So this is the first method for create user, which will perform the API calling operation by using all these details and it will return the response. That's it. Now we have to create similar methods for get user by ID, update user and delete user method. So this is for create user. So it will call this create user API and it will get the response. So what is the response which we receive? That will be present. Again, I have to use the different email ID that we will also take care in our next sessions. But first, just understand we are just creating a CRUD service methods now. Actual test cases we will write later on. Now let's create another method that is for get user by ID. So let me simply copy this method only because most of the details will remain same. For example, response type will be there. I am just changing the method name get user by ID. So as the name suggests, get user by ID. If you see, this is a get user by ID method. That is a type of get request. Since it is a get request, it will not have any request body. It is not having any request body. We just have to pass what we have to pass to get the user by ID, ID of that user. So if you see the response of create user, we get this ID. That ID we have to pass inside this get user by ID API. So this is the ID which is in, we have to pass inside this get user by ID API and then it will give you the details of that user. So if you understood it, this is the base URI which is again common, which we are fetching from config.properties. Path parameter is again /users and after that this dynamic user ID. So if you create the get user by ID method, we have to pass, we don't have to pass any payload here. We just have to pass user ID that I can define it as integer form, that is in numeric form, integer form, integer ID that we have to pass here. Return statement will remain, again given section will remain as it is, base URI will remain as it is, header will remain as it is because it is using the same token, content type is again application JSON, body is not required because request payload is not required in get type of request, dot when, and what is the type of request? Get type of request. And what is the URL? If you see, we have to pass users and this user ID. So user ID we are passing it here. So what we have to include here? After this /users, we have to append that user ID. So I have to use plus and ID. That ID. This is dynamic ID. This we will fetch it from create user response, and that we have to pass inside this get user by ID. So that's why I'm creating get user by ID method here. That is a service method of get user by ID. Now next one is update user. Next one is update user, which is of put type of request. Here again we have to pass the request payload because we are going to update the data. We are going to update some values here. We can pass some gender value as different value. Instead of male, I can pass it as female. Status, I can change it as active. We are updating some data. But what are the things we have to pass here? First, we have to understand what user we are updating. That's why if you see the endpoint of this API, this is a base URI, path parameter users, and then you have to pass the user ID of the user for which we have to update the data. So we are going to use this user ID inside the update user. Here we have to pass that user ID, and we have already modified some of the value in request payload, so that when you will hit this API, you will get updated details of that users. That we can verify in test case, that we can validate in test case. But before validation, we have to perform these actions. So that's why let's create update user by ID method. So I'm just copying the first method again. Now let's see what are the things which we require for update user method. So this is a update user method. What things we have to pass here? First of all, user ID. So user ID along with request payload, updated request payload. So first thing we have to pass here is again ID and request payload. Request payload which is present of which type of object? Again user POJO. User POJO. So this user POJO class object which contains the updated request payload information, that we have to pass here. And then we are going to call in given section base URI remains same, authorization token header remains same, body will also remain the same because we are passing the user payload object. When section remains same, but instead of post, now it is a put type of request. And in URL, we have to pass slash users, but again along with this slash users, we have to pass the ID as well. So again we have to use plus ID. ID means the user ID for which we have to call this update user API. So this is our third service method. So we have created service method for create user, get user, update user, and last one is delete user. So again, this is a delete type of request. There is no request payload. We just have to pass this base URI slash users and ID of that user which we want to delete. So I will just copy this get user by ID. Let's paste it here. What are the things we need? Again, let's name it this method delete user method. Integer ID. ID we have to pass because we should pass which user ID we want to delete. Given section remain as it is, base URI remain as it is, headers will remain as it is, when section will remain as it is. Instead of get, it is now a delete type of request. And again in URL we have to pass slash users and user ID. Slash users plus ID of the user which we want to delete. That's it. And it will return the response. So this is basically our CRUD service methods. So what we have done? We have created one class that is UserCRUD service.java class. We have imported some static packages which we normally required for rest assured. Here what we are doing, we are simply fetching the data from config.property files, that is base URI and token. Token we require to pass in every API. Base URI is again going to be used in every API. And then we have written 4 methods: create user, get user by ID, update user, and delete user. These are the CRUD service methods which will perform the operation. So this create user method will get request payload, which is the object of user POJO class. Then we are calling the API here. If you see given section, we are passing the base URI, which we are fetching it from config.properties. We are passing authorization token. Again, it is fetched from config.properties. We are passing header content, application JSON. We are passing the user POJO object here. That means a payload. For create user and update user, we have to pass the payload. And this is a post type of request in which we are appending this /users after this base URI, so that it will call this API, create user API will be called, and it will return this response. It will return this response. So similarly, we have created for get user by ID, where we are passing the ID of the user. It will call the get user API by taking this ID, and it will return the response. Similarly, update user, we are passing ID along with request payload object. We are calling this API, it will also return the response. Delete user, that requires only ID of the user. If you see, delete user requires only ID. There is no request payload. So it will take the ID, it will call the delete user API, and it will delete this specific user ID. So these operations are performed in this UserCRUD service.java class. Now what are the benefit of this class now? Now in our next session, what we are going to do, we will write the actual test case class. Actual test case where we are going to write assertions, validations, and the actual test execution will happen in the cases. So those test class we will write in com.api.test class. If you see the framework now, we have created a property file, config reader, and we have also created this user CRUD service class which contains all the CRUD service methods. Now we will write the test case class. Inside the test case, we will create the object of this user CRUD service methods. So we will create the object of this user CRUD service class, and by using this object, we will call these methods. We will simply call this create user method, get user by ID method. If you create the object of this class, you can call these methods inside the test classes. So you don't have to write all these steps inside the test cases now, because you have already performing that operation inside this UserCRUD service.java class. So that is the main benefit. This class basically perform all the operation. It will call the API, it will fetch the details, and it will return the response. And that response validation we can perform in the test class. So let's meet in our next session. We will create the actual test case, and we will see how to put assertions and validate the test execution. So I hope you understood creation of POJO class and why we have created this UserCRUD service.java class, which contains all the CRUD methods. So in the next session, we will see how to write this test cases class. So thanks for watching this video. Let's meet in our next session.